The players were way better. So last night, I watched Embiid and Giannis play for about an hour and a half. I watched the entire second half of the Bucks and Sixers. I can't take a lot from it because Harden didn't play. But, I mean, these guys, Giannis and Embiid, are just insane. So Tracy McGrady, who never won in the playoffs as much as a lot of people thought Tracy McGrady should have won. I know Tracy, great guy. Got to be an excuse, right? Well, the guys in the old days, they were much better. So he's talking about Giannis, who's obviously an unbelievable talent, and Tracy McGrady falls into old guy yelling at clouds. Here we go.
I think he would have struggled because of how closed up the paint was. It was tough offensively because the defense was so great. Now, if you can't shoot, it's going to be hard. And Giannis' game is predicated of coming downhill. But I think it would have been tough for him to be who he is today back then.
Oh, boy. Yeah, because Yao Ming, a multiple-time All-Star, was such a devastating perimeter player, as was Tim Duncan and Shaq. Yeah, Shaq pulling up for threes. It couldn't stop him. Yeah, in that clogged lane era, in that defense was so great era, the Phoenix Suns averaged 113 a game. That's the leading scoring team in the NBA today. And they didn't have the benefit of all the three-point shots, which obviously over the last 10 years analytically, coaches are pushing three-point shots. You put that team, that Phoenix team today in the NBA, they'd score just like they did against all the great defensive players then, in that clogged lane era. They couldn't stop Phoenix. Phoenix, you go Google Barkley's Phoenix Suns. They dropped 130 all the time, and not in the three-ball era. Tore defenses apart in that clogged lane era. Why? Because they had a bunch of skilled basketball players. KG, Marley, Barkley, guys that could shoot, guys that could drive, guys that could dribble, just like the great players today. I always laugh at this. Defenses years ago. You think defenses years ago would have stopped Embiid and LeBron and KD, Steph, and Clay's Warriors? Well, that's funny because they couldn't stop Michael and they couldn't stop Barkley and they couldn't stop Yao Ming and they couldn't stop Duncan and they couldn't stop Kobe. They couldn't stop Larry Bird. They couldn't stop Dr. J. The great offensive players have scored my entire life. And athletes, including the NBA, are so much better today. First of all, the European players, it's a big world out there, are so much better now than they used to be. Giannis and Luka. I mean, the international players now are just outrageous. I mean, Embiid, Jokic, they're unbelievably skilled. They weren't that skilled way back then. Sabonis was good, but you didn't get the best of Sabonis. He came as an old man to the States. He was good. I covered him, but you didn't even get his best athletic years. He was like a refrigerator rolling down the floor. A highly skilled refrigerator, but a refrigerator. He could no longer move. But this idea that the tackling people in 1984 made them great defenses. Players are much more skilled. Giannis would have dominated because Giannis would have dominated like Wilt would have in any era. This is all jealousy. T-Mac didn't win as much as he should have in the postseason. Good guy didn't develop his offensive game. Vertical, very vertical. So there's got to be an excuse. It's just nonsense. It's absolute, utter nonsense. Giannis, look at baseball. Baseball is a great example. When I grew up as a kid in the 70s, when I started watching baseball, the Big Red Machine was the best baseball team. They had one guy that threw in the mid-90s, Don Gullett from Kentucky. One guy. It was Fred Norman, Clay Carroll, Raleigh Eastwick, bunch of guys throwing high 80s, bunch of breaking ball, Jack Billingham guys. That was the best baseball team. Every team now, even in the 80s, it was a lot of guys throwing junk and off speed, and you'd see more knuckler. Today, everybody throws mid to high 90s. And by the way, they yank him after 5 2/3 to bring in a guy from the bullpen who's fresh, who throws 101. That ball is moving. There's cutters. There's stuff you'd never seen. The athletes are better trained, better shape, and everybody in the bigs is throwing 98. And the minute it dips to 96, they yank him out. In source works at ESPN for the Packers. He's the best. He's not one of the Packer bloggers. Not a fanboy. They got about 1 million of those. This guy knows his stuff. He's totally tied in. What he said recently in the last 24 hours is not outside speculation. It's inside the room. He says, talking about Aaron Rodgers, for some reason, he hasn't been great all that often in the playoffs since 2010. He's 7-9 in his past 16 playoff games. Yes, he's still spectacular September through December. But even some within the Packers organization wonder if he can still do it January and February. So again, this is not outside the building speculation. This is somebody who is totally tied in. Let me, if I may, to at least some degree, defend Aaron Rodgers here. And let's circle back to you get what you pay for. That's certainly the way it is with coaches. You know who was cheap? Freddie Kitchens and Jim Tom Sula. You know who's not? Sean McVay, Andy Reid, Sean Payton, Bill Belichick, Mike Tomlin. They're really expensive. We all know the Packers have never spent money on free agency. You know what else they never spend money on? Coaches. Matt LaFleur makes $5 million a year. That's it. That is 50% less than the top of the league. That is less than some guys with losing records. $5 million. College coaches, multiple Big Ten coaches make more than that. You didn't like Mike McCarthy. You've anointed Matt LaFleur to an area I'm not sure he deserves. I'm not even sure he was a great coordinator. He left Tennessee. They've never regressed. He didn't leave a wake. They made the playoffs every year. There's an argument to be made that Arthur Smith was a more successful coordinator in Tennessee than Matt LaFleur. When Dan Quinn left Seattle as a defensive coordinator, his 2 years being D.C. there, number one defense in the league, the minute Dan Quinn left, and I'm not saying Dan Quinn's a great head coach. He was an unbelievable coordinator. The minute he left, last 6-7 years, they've gotten worse every year. When Kyle Shanahan left Atlanta, next year, offense wasn't as good. Regardless of what you think of Dan Quinn or Kyle Shanahan, there is absolutely inarguable proof they were unbelievable coordinators. I'm not even sure Matt LaFleur was. You've anointed Matt LaFleur, who inherited Aaron Rodgers, a good roster, stability, and a crappy division. You've anointed him to a level that's ridiculous. People always put him in the group of great young coaches with Shanahan and McVay and Sean McDermott. Those guys built stuff. Those guys inherited messes. McVay built a culture, built an offense, built a staff, built a roster. So did McDermott in Buffalo. So did Shanahan. Shanahan took over for what? Chip Kelly? The locker room was a mess. The roster was bad. The culture was a mess. Matt LaFleur inherited Aaron Rodgers. The only thing Matt LaFleur has done, because McCarthy's got a Super Bowl, Matt doesn't. McCarthy has a winning playoff record, Matt doesn't. But what Matt has done is dominate the NFC North. He's 15-3. And Mike McCarthy's last 3 years, he was 8-7-1. But that's because McCarthy, I would argue, the division was much better. When McCarthy was coach for the Packers, the Bears won a Super Bowl. I think it was his first year. They also had Jay Cutler for years and years and years. Jay Cutler's a lot better than Trubisky and Justin Fields. When Mike McCarthy was coach, Detroit had Jim Caldwell and Stafford. 4 years, 3 of them winning. They once won 11 games. Matt LaFleur got Matt Patricia Lions, a mess. Even the Minnesota Vikings. McCarthy got their peak years where Stefanski was the quarterback coach, and then he was the offensive coordinator, I think, for a year, and then he left. They were never the same. They peaked 2 years ago. They peaked before LaFleur got there. Yeah, LaFleur's just knocking it out of the park in the NFC North. He's 15-3, but that's where the wins come from. They're not coming in the playoffs. He hasn't done anything in the playoffs. He can't beat Brady and Arians. He got beat twice. Can't beat Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy Garoppolo. People have anointed Matt LaFleur to an area, and you get what you pay for. You want Sean Payton, it's going to cost you $15 million. He'll go to Green Bay. I guarantee it. Got to pay $15 million. Matt LaFleur makes $5 million. McCarthy was never a highly paid coach. And I'm not saying Matt LaFleur is bad, but we have anointed him to this level that, well, he gets along better with Aaron. He should. He's younger. Generationally, he and Aaron should get along better. Of course they get along better. I mean, they kind of look like each other. They're good-looking young guys. They probably have the same interest in music and cultural stuff. They should get along better. Of course they do. I connect more with an older producer than a 17-year-old producer. Just generationally, if somebody's got kids, I probably relate better. Right? So, and this is not a shot at Matt LaFleur, but when I see Rob Demovsky saying basically, you know, there's questions about Aaron Rodgers in the postseason. Has he ever had a great coach? Y'all hate Mike McCarthy. He's got a Super Bowl and a winning playoff record, and the division was much better. Matt LaFleur's had a layup in that crappy division. It's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I still can't figure out how Jim Caldwell does an interview for every job. By the way, they're hiring a new coordinator because Green Bay's lost their offensive coordinator to Denver and their quarterback coach to someplace else. So you know what they're doing? They're going to pay top dollar for a coordinator? No. They're bringing a guy out of retirement, 68-year-old Tom Clements. Supposed to be a great guy, and Aaron loves him. He ain't costing you much. He was in retirement. So you get what you pay for. This is inside the organization stuff about they have doubts about Aaron Rodgers. We know they don't spend on free agents. You know what else they don't spend on? Coaches. And there is absolutely no proof that Matt LaFleur deserves to be in the class with McVay, not close, McDermott, not close, culture builders, or Shanahan, who schematically is better than McDermott and McVay. All right, so you know what I push back on? And I know. I don't want to be one of these old